You have poured your entire life into building something, a home, a legacy, a place where you imagined your grandchildren would run through the halls and your daughter would return with her own family to create new memories. You have sacrificed vacations, worked overtime, said no to yourself 1,000 times so you could say yes to the dream of security. And then, in one moment, with one sentence spoken by someone who did not earn any of it, you watch it all threatened. You watch someone who married into your family look at what you built and claim it for people you have never even met. If you know that feeling, if your chest is tightening right now because you have lived some version of this moment, then you understand what it means to have your generosity mistaken for weakness, your love exploited as opportunity. Today, I am going to share with you a story that will make your blood boil and then make you stand up and cheer. This is a story about a woman who was told her home belonged to strangers, and what she did next will change how you see your own power forever. I am Patricia. I am 67 years old, and I remember the exact moment my heart stopped beating in my chest, even though I was still standing there, breathing. It was a Sunday afternoon in late September, the kind of day where the light comes through the windows golden and warm, the kind of day that should hold nothing but peace. I had just finished setting out coffee and the lemon pound cake I had baked that morning, the recipe my own mother had passed down to me before she died, the one I had taught my daughter Rebecca when she was barely tall enough to reach the counter standing on her little step stool. My home smelled like sugar and vanilla and everything that was supposed to be good about family, about tradition, about the life I had built brick by brick over 43 years of marriage to my husband David before cancer took him from me 6 years ago. The dining room table was set with the good china, the pieces with the delicate blue flowers that David had surprised me with on our 25th anniversary, and fresh flowers from my garden sat in the crystal vase that had belonged to his mother. I had wanted everything to be perfect because Rebecca was bringing her husband Marcus over to see the renovation I had just completed on the guest wing, the project I had saved for years to afford. The 3 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms I had added onto the back of the house because I dreamed of my grandchildren staying with me for whole summers, of teaching them to garden and bake and fish in the pond at the edge of my property, the way David had taught Rebecca when she was small. I had not asked Marcos his opinion about anything. I had not consulted him on the colors I had chosen or the fixtures I had selected. This was my home, my investment, my dream that I had worked for since before he was even born. I was a retired hospital administrator, a woman who had overseen budgets of tens of millions of dollars, who had managed hundreds of employees, who had sat in boardrooms with men who thought they could intimidate me, and walked out having gotten exactly what I came for. I had earned every single square foot of this house through decades of work, and I had maintained it through years of widowhood with my own 2 hands and my own determination. So when Marcus walked through the new addition that afternoon, when he ran his hand along the granite countertops in the kitchenette and looked out the windows at the view of the pond and the old oak trees and the garden that David and I had planted together 30 years ago, I expected him to say something polite. I expected him to acknowledge the craftsmanship, perhaps, or to thank me for my hospitality. What I did not expect, what I could never have prepared myself for, was what actually came out of his mouth. He turned to look at me with a smile that I now understand was not a smile at all, but a declaration of ownership, and he said, without any hesitation, without any awareness that he was speaking to a woman who could destroy him with a single phone call to the right attorney. What a beautiful house. My parents and my sister are going to live here. Not a question, not a request, not even the pretense of asking my permission. A statement of fact, as if my home had already been transferred to people I had met exactly twice, at the wedding and at one awkward Thanksgiving dinner where his mother had criticized my cooking and his father had fallen asleep on my sofa with his shoes on my cushions. I felt my daughter's hand on my arm, and when I turned to look at her, I saw something in her eyes that made my stomach drop through the floor. I saw that she already knew. I saw that this had been planned. I saw that my own child, the girl I had rocked to sleep and nursed through fevers and driven to college with tears streaming down my face because I was so proud and so sad all at once, had conspired with this man to give away my home to strangers. Rebecca spoke before I could find my voice. "Mom, just hear us out," she said, and her tone was the same one she had used when she was 16 and had crashed my car into the mailbox and was trying to explain why it was not really her fault. "Marcus's family has been struggling. His dad lost his job last year, and they have been living in a tiny apartment, and his sister just had a baby and there is no room, and this addition is just sitting here empty." I listened to the words coming out of my daughter's mouth, and I thought about all the times I had sat in that hospital conference room listening to administrators try to justify budget cuts that would hurt patients, all the carefully constructed arguments designed to make something unreasonable sound logical. This was exactly the same. This was my daughter trying to make me feel guilty for having something I had earned, trying to make me feel selfish for not wanting to give it away to people who had done nothing to deserve it. I took a breath. I counted to 5 in my head, the way my therapist had taught me after David died, when the grief would sometimes rise up so fast that I thought I might drown in it. And then I said, very calmly, very quietly, in the voice I had used for 30 years when I needed someone to understand that I was not asking, I was telling, "No." Marcus laughed. He actually laughed as if I had made a joke, as if the word "no" from a 67-year-old woman in her own home was somehow amusing. "Patricia," he said, and I noticed that he had never once called me Mom or even Mrs. Patterson. "You do not understand. My parents need this. They are family now." I felt something shift inside me then, something that had been coiled tight for the 3 years since Rebecca had married this man, something I had been trying to ignore because I wanted my daughter to be happy, something I had been swallowing down every time he talked over me at dinner or made comments about how much money I must have, just sitting around, or asked pointed questions about what would happen to the house when I died. All of that came together in one clear, cold moment of understanding. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, and I said, "Rebecca, I want you to listen to me very carefully. This is my home. I bought it with your father 43 years ago with money we earned through our own work. I raised you in this house. I nursed your father in this house when he was dying. I grieved him in this house. I rebuilt my life in this house. And I just spent 2 years and $180,000 of my retirement savings renovating an addition onto this house because I dreamed of having my grandchildren stay with me here, not strangers I do not know and did not invite." Marcos started to interrupt me, his mouth already forming some argument, but I held up my hand and he stopped. Good. He should have learned by now that when I hold up my hand, I am not finished speaking. I did not build those rooms for your parents, I continued, looking directly at him now. I did not work 60-hour weeks for 30 years so that people who have never contributed a single thing to my life could live in my home rent-free. And I did not raise my daughter to think that it was acceptable to give away her mother's property without even asking. The silence that followed was thick enough to cut. I could hear the clock ticking in the hallway, the one David had inherited from his grandfather, the one that had marked every important moment in this house for decades. Rebecca's face had gone pale, and I could see her trying to calculate how to salvage this, how to manipulate me back into compliance the way she had always been able to do when she was young and I was softer, more willing to bend. But I was not soft anymore. Losing David had burned away all the softness, had left behind something harder and clearer, like glass forged in fire. "Mom," Rebecca said, and her voice was trembling now, "you are being selfish. You have all this space and you are just one person. Marcus's family needs help." I felt the word hit me like a slap. Selfish. My own daughter had called me selfish for not wanting to give my home to people I did not know. I thought about all the times I had been there for her, the down payment I had given her for her first apartment, the wedding I had paid for, the $30,000 celebration she had insisted on having, even though I had suggested something smaller and more intimate. The monthly checks I still sent to help with expenses because Marcus's job in pharmaceutical sales apparently did not pay quite as well as he had implied when he was courting her. The car I had bought her when hers broke down. The emergency room bills I had covered when she broke her wrist. The thousands and thousands of dollars I had poured into her life because I loved her, because she was my child, because that was what mothers did. And now she was standing in my home calling me selfish because I would not house her husband's entire family in the addition I had built with my own dreams. I made a decision then. I made the kind of decision that feels like jumping off a cliff, terrifying and exhilarating all at once. The kind of decision that changes everything. I picked up my phone from the side table where I had left it and I called my attorney, Richard, who had handled David's estate and who I had known for 25 years. He answered on the second ring, because that is the kind of attorney he is. "Richard," I said, keeping my voice steady while my daughter and her husband stared at me. "I need you to come to my house tomorrow morning. I want to revise my will and I want to make sure my property is protected from any claims by family members or their spouses. All of it. The house, the land, the investments, everything." I could hear Richard's pause on the other end of the line, the careful consideration of a man who had seen enough family disputes to know exactly what was happening. "I can be there at 9, he said. "Patricia, is everything all right?" I looked at Marcus, whose face had gone from smug to furious in the span of my phone call. I looked at Rebecca, who had tears streaming down her face now, who was clutching her husband's arm as if I was the one who had done something wrong. "Everything is fine, Richard," I said. "I am just taking care of what needs to be taken care of." After I hung up the phone, the explosion came exactly as I had expected. Marcus started yelling about how I was being unreasonable, about how family was supposed to help family, about how his parents had nowhere else to go, and I was condemning them to poverty. Rebecca joined in, her voice high and desperate, talking about how I had promised I would always be there for her, how I was abandoning her, how I was choosing money over my own daughter. I let them rage. I sat in the wing-back chair by the fireplace, the one David used to sit in every evening with his newspaper and his reading glasses, and I let their words wash over me like water. When they finally ran out of steam, when they stood there panting and red-faced waiting for me to crumble, I simply said, "I think it is time for you to leave my home now." The look on Marcus's face was something I will never forget. It was the look of a man who had been so certain of his own power, so confident that a 67-year-old widow would be easy to manipulate, and who had just discovered that he had fundamentally miscalculated. "You cannot do this," he said, and his voice was lower now, threatening. "Rebecca is your daughter. We are your family. If you cut us out, you will die alone in this house with no one who cares about you." I stood up then, slowly, deliberately, letting him see that I was not afraid of him, not even a little. "I have been alone since my husband died," I said. "I have learned that alone is not the same as lonely. I have friends, community, a life I have built that has nothing to do with you. And I would rather die alone in my own home, which I earned, than live surrounded by people who only see me as a resource to be exploited." Rebecca was sobbing now, ugly crying with mascara running down her face, and part of me wanted to reach out to her, to comfort her the way I had done 1,000 times before. But I held myself still. I had spent 3 years comforting her while she slowly revealed who she had become since marrying this man, and I was done. I was done being the endless well of resources and support and money that never got a thank you, that only got demands for more. They left. Marcus slammed the door so hard that the windows rattled, and I heard his car tear out of my driveway, spraying gravel across my lawn. I stood in my living room surrounded by the cooling coffee and the untouched lemon pound cake and the flowers wilting slightly in their crystal vase, and I felt something I had not expected to feel. I felt free. The next morning, Richard came as promised. We sat at my dining room table and I explained everything: the entitled demand, the planned conspiracy, the threats when I refused to comply. Richard listened with the patient attention of a man who had seen every possible permutation of family dysfunction, and when I was finished, he said, "Patricia, I think we need to do more than revise your will. I think we need to create a comprehensive estate plan that protects you now, not just after you are gone." Over the next 2 weeks, Richard and I worked together to restructure everything. My home was placed in an irrevocable trust that I controlled, meaning no one could claim it or contest it or pressure me into changing it. My investments were reorganized into accounts that would pass directly to beneficiaries I chose, bypassing probate entirely. And my will was rewritten from scratch, removing Rebecca as the primary beneficiary, and instead directing the majority of my estate to a scholarship fund at the community college where David and I had both gotten our start. A fund that would help first-generation students like we had been achieve their education without drowning in debt. If this story is resonating with you, if you have felt the sting of being seen as nothing more than what you can provide, please know that you are not alone. This channel is a place for people who understand what it means to love your family and still need to protect yourself from them. If you are finding strength in these words, consider subscribing. We are building a community of people who are learning to set boundaries without guilt, and there is a place here for you. I did leave Rebecca something in the will. I left her the blue china with the delicate flowers, the dishes David and I had cherished, with a letter explaining that I hoped she would one day understand the value of things that cannot be measured in money. I did not know if she would ever read that letter. I did not know if we would ever speak again, but I had done what I needed to do to protect myself, and that was enough. 3 weeks after that terrible Sunday, I got a phone call from a number I did not recognize. When I answered, it was Marcus's mother, Linda, a woman I had met exactly twice and whose opinion of me had always been made clear through snide comments and dismissive glances. "Patricia," she said without any greeting, "we need to talk about this living situation." I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I said very politely, "I am sorry, who is this?" I knew exactly who it was, of course, but I wanted her to say it. I wanted her to identify herself as someone who had no relationship with me, no claim on me, no right to call my home and make demands. There was a pause, the kind of pause that happens when someone realizes they are not in control of a situation they expected to dominate. "This is Linda, Marcus's mother, your daughter's mother-in-law." I let the silence stretch for a moment, then said, "I see. And what exactly is it you wanted to discuss?" Linda launched into a speech that sounded rehearsed, all about how family helps family, and how she had raised Marcus to believe that elders should be respected and cared for, and how she could not understand why I was being so difficult about something so simple. "You have all that space," she said, echoing Rebecca's words with such precision that I knew they had coordinated this attack. 3 extra bedrooms and 2 bathrooms just sitting there empty while my family struggles. What kind of grandmother does not want to help her own family? I took a breath. I thought about what I wanted to say, really thought about it, because I knew that whatever I said next would define how this woman saw me for the rest of her life. And then I decided that I did not care how she saw me. "Linda," I said, "let me be very clear with you. I am not your family. I am the mother of a woman who happens to be married to your son. That does not make your struggles my responsibility. That does not give you any claim on my home or my resources or my life. I worked for 43 years to build what I have. Your son has been married to my daughter for 3 years, during which time he has contributed nothing but demands and entitlement. If you need housing, I suggest you explore the many options available to you that do not include showing up in my home uninvited and expecting to stay forever." The sound Linda made was somewhere between a gasp and a squawk. "You cannot speak to me that way," she said. "I am a mother too. I deserve respect." I thought about respect then. I thought about what it meant and who deserved it and how it was earned. "Respect," I said, "is not given based on the title of mother. Respect is earned through actions, through kindness, through the way we treat others. You have never shown me any respect, Linda. You criticized my cooking at Thanksgiving. You let your husband sleep on my furniture with his shoes on. You raised a son who looks at a 67-year-old widow and sees nothing but a mark, a resource to be exploited. So no, I will not be giving you my respect, and I certainly will not be giving you my home." I hung up the phone before she could respond. My hands were shaking slightly, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of finally saying what I had wanted to say for years. I had spent so much of my life being polite, being accommodating, being the calm and reasonable one who smoothed over conflict and made everyone comfortable. But there was nothing comfortable about being used. There was nothing reasonable about being expected to sacrifice my security for people who saw me as nothing but an obstacle to their desires. Over the following months, the pressure campaign intensified. Rebecca called, sometimes crying, sometimes angry, always with the same message. I was destroying our family. I was being cruel. I was going to regret this when I was old and sick and needed someone to care for me. I let her calls go to voicemail most of the time. When I did answer, I kept my responses short and calm. I love you, Rebecca. I am not changing my mind. I hope you can find peace with that. It was not easy. There were nights when I sat alone in my living room, looking at the family photos on the walls, the images of Rebecca growing up, her first day of school, her graduation, her wedding. There were nights when I cried into my pillow the way I had cried after David died, grief for something lost that could never be recovered. But in the mornings, I got up. I tended my garden. I met my friends for coffee. I volunteered at the hospital where I had once worked, helping new patients navigate the confusing system. I built a life that was mine, that depended on no one's approval, that no one could take from me. Right now, some of you might be feeling what I felt in those early days. That crushing weight of being asked to give everything while receiving nothing but criticism in return. That loneliness of loving someone who sees you as a means to an end. I need to pause here and ask you something directly. Have you ever felt like nothing more than a bank account with legs to the people who should love you most? Have you ever given and given and given only to be told you are selfish when you finally say no? If you are nodding right now, if you feel that familiar ache in your chest, I want you to know that your experience is real and it matters. When you share in the comments, you are not just telling your story. You are creating a lifeline for someone else who thinks they are the only one. Type in the comments, "I am more than what I can provide." Just those words. And when you read the other comments, when you see how many people have felt exactly the same way, you will understand that you were never alone. You were just silent together. 6 months after that terrible Sunday, something unexpected happened. I received a letter. Not an email, not a text, not a phone call that I could ignore. An actual letter, handwritten on good stationery, delivered by the postal service. The return address was Rebecca's. I sat with that letter unopened on my kitchen table for 3 days. I was afraid to read it. I was afraid it would be more manipulation, more guilt, more demands disguised as reconciliation. I was afraid that if I opened it and found more of the same, it would break something in me that I had worked very hard to rebuild. On the 4th day, I made myself a cup of tea, sat in David's chair, and opened the letter. It began, "Dear Mom, I am writing this letter because I do not trust myself to say these things out loud without making excuses or getting defensive. And you deserve better than that from me." I had to stop reading then. I had to take several deep breaths and blink away the tears that were suddenly making the words swim on the page. When I could see clearly again, I continued. Rebecca wrote about how the months since our confrontation had been the hardest of her life. She wrote about how Marcus's parents had moved in with them into their small apartment, and how the reality of living with his family had opened her eyes to things she had refused to see before. She wrote about his mother's constant criticism, his father's inability to contribute to anything, his sister's demands that Rebecca provide free childcare for the new baby. She wrote about how she had finally understood, living in that environment, what she had been asking me to accept. "I thought I was being a good wife," she wrote. "I thought that supporting Marcus meant supporting his whole family, no matter what. I thought that was what love looked like. But, Mom, I watched his mother treat me the way I watched Marcus treat you that day, like I was just a resource to be used, not a person with my own needs and limits. And I realized that I had learned that somewhere. I had learned to see you that way. I had learned that from him. The letter went on for 4 pages. Rebecca wrote about how she was in therapy now, working through patterns she had not even recognized before. She wrote about how her marriage was struggling, how Marcus did not understand why she was suddenly setting boundaries with his family, how she was not sure they would survive as a couple. She wrote that she was not asking for my forgiveness, not yet, because she knew she had not earned it. She was asking only for a chance to try. I read that letter 5 times. I held it in my hands and I cried. Not just tears of sadness, but tears of something else too. Something that felt like spring after a very long winter. I did not call her immediately. I sat with my feelings for another week, letting them settle, making sure that my response was not just an emotional reaction, but a considered choice. When I finally picked up the phone, when I heard Rebecca's voice trembling on the other end, I said the only thing I could say. "Come for coffee, just you. We need to talk." She came on a Saturday morning, alone, looking thinner than I remembered and older somehow, as if the past 6 months had aged her 10 years. We sat at my kitchen table with the good china between us, the blue flowers that had witnessed so many important moments in this house, and we talked, really talked, in a way we had not talked since she was a teenager and David was still alive and everything had seemed simpler. Rebecca told me about her marriage, about the cracks that had started to show even before that terrible Sunday, but that she had been too invested to acknowledge. She told me about Marcus's gambling, something she had hidden from me, the debts that kept mounting, the constant need for money that she now understood was never going to end. She told me that his plan to move his family into my home had not been about helping them. It had been about freeing up their apartment to sell, about using my property as a way to generate cash he could pour into his addiction. "I was so blind," she said, and her voice broke on the words. "I loved him, and I wanted to believe he was what he said he was. I wanted to believe that supporting him meant proving my loyalty, proving I was a good wife. I did not see that I was losing myself, losing you, losing everything that actually mattered." I reached across the table and took my daughter's hand. Her fingers were cold and they shook slightly in my grip, the way they had shaken when she was a child afraid of thunderstorms. "We all make mistakes," I said. "The question is what we do when we finally see them." Over the following months, Rebecca began rebuilding her life. She separated from Marcus, then divorced him, a process made complicated by his debts and his anger and his family's furious conviction that she was making a terrible mistake. She moved into a small apartment of her own, found a therapist she trusted, started working at a non-profit that helped families in crisis find housing and resources. She did not ask me for money. She did not ask me for anything except time, which I gave her slowly, carefully, watching for signs that the old patterns might reassert themselves. If you have been in a situation where you had to learn to trust someone again after they hurt you, you know how hard that is. You know the constant vigilance, the fear that every kind word might be a manipulation, every apology might be a strategy. I lived in that space for a long time with Rebecca, holding part of myself back, protecting myself even as I opened the door to reconciliation. But slowly, over time, I began to see real change. I saw my daughter taking responsibility instead of making excuses. I saw her setting boundaries with people who tried to use her. I saw her doing the hard work of becoming the person she wanted to be, rather than the person Marcos had wanted her to be. Stories like these have the power to change how we see our own lives. If you are finding clarity here, if something in this narrative is helping you understand your own situation better, consider subscribing to this channel. Every story I share is chosen to help us all grow stronger, wiser, and more compassionate with ourselves and others. There is a community here of people who understand, who have lived through similar struggles, who are learning that it is possible to love someone and still protect yourself from them. 2 years have passed since that terrible Sunday afternoon. My home is still mine, protected by the trusts and legal structures that Richard helped me create. The addition I built, those 3 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms that were supposed to house Marcus's family, are occupied now by someone I actually chose to share my space with. Her name is Elena, and she is a 69-year-old widow who lost her husband to the same kind of cancer that took David. We met at a grief support group at the hospital where I volunteer. We became friends, then better friends, then the kind of friends who check on each other every day and know each other's coffee orders and finish each other's sentences. When Elena's landlord sold her building, and she faced the prospect of trying to find affordable housing in a market that seemed designed to crush seniors on fixed incomes, I made her an offer. I offered her the guest wing at a rent we both agreed was fair, a rent that covers her utilities and contributes to the property taxes, but that does not treat her as a source of profit. She accepted, and now my home has life in it again. Now there is someone to share morning coffee with, someone to garden beside, someone to watch movies with on rainy evenings. We are not family by blood or by marriage. We are family by choice, and that kind of family feels more precious to me than any obligation ever could. Rebecca comes to visit now, usually once a month, sometimes more often. She has dinner with Elena and me, the 3 of us cooking together in the kitchen where I taught her to bake that lemon pound cake so many years ago. She has started dating again, carefully, someone she met through her work at the nonprofit, a man who volunteers because he genuinely cares about helping people and not because he is looking for something to exploit. I have met him twice. I am reserving judgment because I have learned that lesson painfully. But I see the way Rebecca watches herself around him, the way she checks her own reactions, the way she is determined not to repeat the patterns of her past. That gives me hope. Marcus tried to contact me once, about a year after the divorce was finalized. He sent an email that Richard intercepted, a long rambling message about how I had destroyed his life, how Rebecca's leaving was somehow my fault, how I owed him compensation for the emotional damage I had caused his family. Richard forwarded it to me with a note that simply said, "For your records, no response necessary." I did not respond. I deleted the email and went out to my garden and planted new bulbs for spring daffodils and tulips and crocuses that would push through the cold ground when winter finally ended and remind me that growth always follows the harshest seasons. I know how isolating it feels when you are going through something difficult and nobody seems to understand. That is why I share these stories, why this channel exists. Here, your feelings are valid, your struggles are real, and your story matters. If this is giving you even a small sense of relief or understanding, please subscribe. You deserve to have a place where you feel heard and seen, where your experience is not dismissed or minimized, where someone else says, "Yes, I know exactly what that feels like." I think often about what would have happened if I had given in that day, if I had been softer, more accommodating, if I had let my love for Rebecca override my own needs and boundaries. I imagine Marcus's parents moving in, taking over my space, treating me as an unwelcome guest in my own home. I imagine the slow erosion of my autonomy, my resources, my sense of self. I imagine dying in that scenario, surrounded by people who never saw me, never valued me, never understood what they were taking. And I am so grateful that I found the strength to say no. The strength did not come from nowhere. It came from David, from the 37 years we spent building a life together, from his constant reminder that I was worth something independent of what I could do for others. It came from my career, from the decades of being tested and challenged and learning that I could meet any obstacle if I approached it with preparation and determination. It came from the grief work I did after David died, the therapy that helped me understand that my value was inherent, not conditional. It came from the friends who stood with me when my daughter turned against me, who reminded me that I was not crazy, not selfish, not wrong to protect myself. And it came from somewhere deep inside me, from a core of self-respect that had been planted in my childhood by parents who taught me that no one had the right to take what I had earned. Elena is reading in the living room right now, in the chair by the window that catches the afternoon light perfectly. I can hear the turning of her pages from where I sit at my dining room table writing this story, remembering everything. The house smells like the stew I have simmering on the stove, beef and vegetables and herbs from my garden, dinner for two people who chose each other and who are grateful for each other's company. The edition that was supposed to be claimed by strangers is full of Elena's things now. Her books and her photographs and the quilt her mother made 50 years ago that drapes across the bed she sleeps in peacefully every night. This is not the life I imagined when I built those rooms. It is better. My daughter is coming for dinner tomorrow. She is bringing her new boyfriend, whose name is Thomas, and who works as a social worker helping homeless veterans find stability. Elena has already decided she likes him based on nothing more than his profession. I am waiting to see, but there is hope in my heart again. Hope I thought I had lost that terrible Sunday when my son-in-law looked at my home and claimed it for his own. Hope that Rebecca has truly changed, that she sees me now as a person instead of a provider, that we can build something new between us from the wreckage of what was. Sometimes we need to hear that transformation is possible, that we are not doomed to repeat the same painful patterns forever, that it is possible to lose something precious, a relationship, a sense of trust, a vision of the future, and still build something meaningful from what remains. If this story is giving you hope, showing you that change is real and within reach, then stay with me. Subscribe so you never miss a story that might be exactly what you need to hear at exactly the right moment. This channel is a place where we tell the truth about what it costs to love people who sometimes hurt us and what it takes to love ourselves enough to survive. I am 69 now, 2 years older than I was on that terrible Sunday. My hair is grayer, my joints are stiffer, my face carries more lines than it used to. But I am also stronger than I was, clearer about who I am and what I will and will not accept. I look at myself in the mirror each morning, the same mirror where I prepare for my days, and I see a woman who has survived loss and betrayal and emerged not diminished but refined. I see a woman who knows her own value. I see a woman who will never again let anyone, not a son-in-law, not a daughter, not anyone, make her feel like she does not deserve to occupy her own space, her own life, her own story. This is my home. I built it. I earned it. I fought for it. And I am going to enjoy every single day I have left in it, surrounded by people who see me, who value me, who chose me as freely as I chose them. That is the ending I created for myself. Not the ending Marcus planned, not the ending Rebecca once enabled, but my ending, the one I deserve. The stew is almost ready. Elena has put down her book and is coming into the kitchen, and I hear her asking if she can help set the table. I tell her yes, use the blue china, the good dishes that David gave me all those years ago. The ones that will go to Rebecca someday, along with the letter explaining what they mean. We set the table together, two widows who found each other in grief and built something beautiful from shared understanding. The late afternoon sun comes through the windows golden and warm, the same light that fell on that terrible Sunday, but different now, better now. I look around my home at the pictures on the walls and the memories in every corner and the life I have made in the space I claimed, and I feel at peace. Not the peace of having everything resolved, because families are never fully resolved, but the peace of knowing that whatever comes next, I will face it as myself, as Patricia, as a woman who said no when she needed to, and yes when she wanted to, and who learned finally that those are both forms of love. The table is set. The food is ready. Tomorrow my daughter will come, and we will eat together, and we will see what the future holds. But tonight, Elena and I will share a meal in the home I protected, and we will talk about our days and our plans and the small precious details of lives that belong entirely to us. That is enough. That is more than enough. That is everything.